Hello, welcome to Alta Live. I am so excited for today's discussion on New York media's obsession with writing about Los Angeles and California culture and why they keep getting it so wrong. My name is Beth Spotswood. I am Alta's digital editor and a native Californian who, like our two guests today, are sick of seeing East Coast publications totally misread the West Coast room. Joining me today, our guest, Stacey Grenrock Woods. She penned an Alta newsletter on this very subject, which is what prompted today's Alta Live. Stacey is the author of the memoir, I, California, about growing up in Los Angeles. She was a correspondent for The Daily Show with Jon Stewart and a longtime advice columnist for Esquire. She also had a recurring role as Trisha Thune on the show Arrested Development, which we all are in love with, and wrote a handbook for the high desert for the most recent issue of Alta Journal, which I'm going to pitch to you in a second. She is joined today by Mary Melton, Alta's editor-at-large and our official Angeleno expert, the former editor-in-chief of Los Angeles Magazine, which won a staggering number of awards under her leadership. Mary is a graduate of Hollywood High, and if you look up Los Angeles in an encyclopedia, you will probably see a picture of Mary E. Melton. She is just Los Angeles in a person. Before we begin, some brief housekeeping. Alta Live is the digital interview series we do here at Alta Journal. If you are unfamiliar with Alta, we are an award-winning quarterly magazine and website focused on California and the West, where we write about California and the West from California and the West. You can join us as a member for as little as $3 a month and support the work we do, including our monthly California book club, which again kind of shifts that focus of authors to the incredible work that's being done from the West Coast. That's free, fun to join. Isabel Allende is our guest coming up later this month. We also present free events like this today. So if you haven't checked us out, I hope that you do so, where you can visit us and check out all of our work at altaonline.com and consider joining us as a member for, again, as little as $3 a month. There is a Q&A button at the bottom of this screen to ask questions for our guests. We're going to chat for about 30 minutes, and then we're going to get to as many of your questions as we can. I think we're going to have an engaged audience today. This is a hot topic. This will be recorded. This interview and discussion will be recorded and posted to altaonline.com later today. We are also going to send you an email with a link to this video, some of the articles we reference, and invitations to some upcoming events. With that, I am so happy to be here with our community today. Please let us know, Dejer, hi from Burbank, where you are zooming in from today. Central Valley, it's great to see. San Francisco. It's always fun to see where our community is zooming in from. I am in Northern California, in Novato, California. Mary and Stacey, please tell me you are not in New York right now. Where are you?
I am in Yucca Valley. I live in the desert. I wrote for the desert issue, as you have right
Thank
now.
you.
I wrote the High Desert Handbook because I live here now. I live in Yucca Valley, and it is snowing.
Oh,
It's
how shocking that would be to an East Coast media publication.
I never got so cold. You'll like this. I've never spent a colder winter than a winter in the desert of California. Yeah, colder summer than wrong.
It's been really exceptionally cold by LA standards as well, where I am from and continue to live in a wonderful little town called Eagle Rock that's squeezed between Glendale and Pasadena, where we did have snow, if you can believe it, Stacey.
Yes, I can. I've seen pictures.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. So
I've heard them being referred to as the Pasadena Alps lately.
Yeah, exactly.
Pasadena Alps. We're getting some bi-coastal people, which will be interesting to hear.
Good.
So chic of them. Okay, Stacey, first of all, I just want to welcome everyone and say, I hope we're all up for kind of an irreverent conversation. We love journalists, we love media, and we are forever in support of them.
Absolutely.
But we're going to have a little fun with our friends across the coast. So Stacey, let's start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about this recent New York Times article that prompted you to write a newsletter for Alta?
Yes. Okay. So the article came out about a month ago. It's called "Is New York Turning into Los Angeles?" It's by Michael Grinbaum. And again, this is not about the writer, the journalist, nothing like that. I understand you get an assignment, you take it. And it's not about that at all. But the tone of it was so strange. What I didn't like is "turning into" is such a weird and loaded phrase for me. It implies that, you know, there's something wrong with it. And what I got out of it was something what I noticed another someone else describes as a sort of like this baseless scorn that they level on us. And you know, this is a description of like areas in New York that have like, you know, a weed store, crystal stores, ketamine spas, whatever. And then it's all labeled as LA, which, you know, why is that LA? That's not my LA. I don't think it's most people's LA. And I argue in the piece that bad ideas, you know, they tend to congregate around the coast for some reason. And they're not of LA. That's not LA that I know.
Mary, this kind of misread of LA, misread of the West Coast room is absolutely nothing new to those of us on the West Coast who see these types of articles. Can you talk a little bit just about the collection of incorrect looks at California culture that have come out of the East Coast?
It's a large collection, Beth. Yeah, it's an archive at this point. And you know, I drop those into our Slack channel at Alta all the time whenever I spot them in the wild. It's just, I think Stacey really nailed it when she said, so many people in LA read these stories and just say, that's not my LA. And I think you similarly have that happen in San Francisco, where you read them and go, that's not my San Francisco. And it's very jarring. A lot of folks will say like, well, why even care? Like who cares what they think about LA or how they frame LA? But it does, I mean, we will have some fun here and get into it and talk a little bit about like what those cliches are. But just to frame up like the bigger picture, like it does matter. Like the New York Times is the second biggest newspaper in the country. It's a paper that can set agendas, can set policy, can have influence on elections. Hillary's emails, anyone? You know, like it really is an important paper where, and truth is at the very base of its current branding campaign for the last couple of years. And I'm not at all calling out the veracity of the New York Times or asking anyone to be skeptical of journalism in general. But when I read stories like that and think, this is not at all, this was not an opinion piece, and these are usually not opinion pieces. These are features in the mostly vapid style section. I'm already getting into it. I'm sorry. And I just, and they're so ill-informed, and they've got some really great people at the New York Times here on the ground, like some terrific reporters. And I've met and know a couple of them who I think are wonderful reporters. It's more when they parachute people in and have them come out with this sense of a place that's completely misguided, myopic, and relies on cliches that feel like jokes that Woody Allen left on the cutting room floor in Annie Hall in 1977. Like really, tofu and sprouts, you're still going there? This is like 45 years ago when a vegetarian sandwich was cutting edge. Like, have you not been to any other city in America that there's diversity on now? There's a lot of pork. I get it in, you know, the middle of America, but there's also like vegetarian sandwiches. So it's just crazy to me that they still really just think that this is the embodiment of LA, and they come away with these stories that have, I think, a bad effect on people's perception, and that can have a trickle down effect, even thinking about like funding, right? Like, you know, funding for federal projects. Like when people have an idea that that place is a lesser than or not as important, then I think like this feeling that New York is still the center of the universe. And that's what, to me, it comes back to all the time. Like, I think it's embedded in insecurity, personally.
Who's insecure?
I do too.
Yeah. Okay. So what do you?
And it's funny you said, and I'm going to maybe go kind of deep for a second, but it did spark this in me when I was reading over, you know, the piece and a few of the things we've been talking about. I thought this tone is very familiar. What is the tone? It's this is how my family treats me. Because, and let me explain that. And I think it's because I am the only Angeleno in my family. I have a family of people from the East Coast, and I'm the youngest, and we moved here. They moved here, and I was born, and it's the same sort of tone. Like, is she going to be able to feed herself? Can she, you know, it's the same sort of condescending, like, well, it's nice that you're doing this sort of thing, but No, we're really, we make the.
Yeah, we own culture, we own the arts, like how dare this like upstart city that's 200 plus years old, you know, move in and encroach. And frankly, like the insecurity part of it is, I think there's only room for one great city, and there can be multiple great cities, right? But in the New York Times view of things, and there were many articles, and there frequently are articles on the front page of the New York Times where it refers to itself, the city, in a way that I feel like it's like 1907 in the way that they're talking about the city. Right? You know, can New York become the greatest city in the world again? Like if I dropped into that, can Los Angeles become the greatest city in the world again? And that came in the Los Angeles Times, I would be so embarrassed for the Los Angeles.
Right.
Like, is that really how you think of us and see us in this bigger world picture, this cosmopolitan international worldview that you're supposed to be giving us, which is actually very, very narrow.
Well, we have a lot to touch upon here, but while we're now I'm getting all pissed off. But while we're on this insecurity kind of, let's expand upon that a little more. Andrea asks in the Q&A, the idea of LA as lesser than is exactly what I want to hear about. Who has the greater inferiority complex, LA or New York? Are you guys just being really touchy, or is LA obsessed with LA, or is New York obsessed with LA?
It's a great question. And I feel like it's for me, like, I think that they already are in love with it. Like, I really think this is like, you know, the kid in, we all have this story, right? The kid in junior high who was mean to you, but he actually was in love with you. I remember him, and I'm really sorry about that. But I think that there is a little bit of that. Like, I don't feel like I don't at all feel like we're an inferior city, but I don't judge us or rank us like that. Like, I think we are our own city. So it's more to me this idea that there's only space for them, and that a lot of the industries well, I mean, if we really want to start digging into it, like a lot of the industries that New York became famous for, like sometimes I start digging into it, like, well, what did New York really give us? And I know it's a great city all on its own. My husband is from New York. I can't even get him to go visit New York anymore, to be perfectly honest. But you know, I get what's great about it. But at the same time, you know, finances, Wall Street, advertising, like a lot of things that really have had a pretty ill effect, or even the way that they put two of their biggest gifts to us of the last 10 to 15 years have been Donald Trump and Giuliani, you know, who they really promoted in a way that is insane. Like, Stacey, do you know the first way in which Trump was written about in the New York Times?
No.
Okay. Can I just share this really quick? Because I think it's important. It's important. Okay. I pulled that up this morning. This is in the first major profile of Donald Trump from November 1st of 1976. He is tall, lean, and blonde with dazzling white teeth, and he looks ever so much like Robert Redford.
No.
He rides around town in a chauffeured silver Cadillac with his initials DJT on the plates. He dates slinky fashion models, belongs to the most elegant clubs, and at only 30 years of age, estimates that he is worth more than $200 million. This was the first profile of Donald Trump in the New York Times.
We would like a byline. There's a request for a byline. Who wrote this?
I feel too bad. I'll put it in the, I don't know her.
We don't want to out them. We don't know if they're still alive.
I don't want to out them. I feel bad. They may still be alive. It was 1976, but I'm just saying, like, they set, right? They set agendas. They have influence over how people see and perceive people. That's the first of Donald Trump.
I see what you're saying. You know, they say we are dumb hippies who drink matcha and worship crystals, and it's hard to get out of your mind, right? Is that?
Yeah.
It sets a tone.
Yeah. I do like
Where does it leave us? Because then it makes us have to be rise above it, which kind of makes us seem like hippies at the same, you know, we're damned if we do and damned if we don't.
Well, and it makes you seem insecure when you need to rise above it, because LA is put in this position of having to defend itself or clarify, we don't all have crystals lined up on our windowsills.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and they just things with just such broad brushes, right? In a way that's just so unacceptable, and then starts to make me question when they are describing other places. Like, really, like, is that what St. Louis is really like? Is that really what Portland is like? I'd love to know. I don't know. You can't please everyone. I get that. Like, everyone's going to come away with a different perception. Some tourists will come here and come away thinking it is just matcha and crystals based on where they go in the city.
Exactly.
It's really hard to only have a matcha and crystal experience in Los Angeles. Just to be clear, like that takes a lot of work to have that be your only impression impression of the city after leaving it. But they're stuck. I mean, I think the New York Times, frankly, is stuck in its ways and its cliches in a lot of ways does amazing journalism, incredible investigative pieces. I'm a huge subscriber to the New York Times. That's not what's on the table, but just being stuck in this idea that this is where we're stuck is just so, right? It's just, I mean, Stacey, they still in the vows section, I'm on a tangent, but on the vows section of the New York Times, they still think it's important to note where the brides and grooms went to college. In 2023, it's still important to them to note where someone went to college.
Is that an East Coast thing?
If it's a story about a judicial appointment and I need to know that he's a graduate of the University of Chicago and may skew conservative in his, or opposite of NYU, like I can see why that's an important framing. This is not important to me that a man on his third marriage, which is often the case, graduated from Duke in 1956 with a degree in sociology. Like, read your Sunday paper this weekend. Like, it's just insane that, and even if that isn't East Coast
vows, but now I will.
That says a lot. Like, that says a lot about the East Coast and how important pedigree still is, in a way that gets us, I think, right back, Stacey, to the threatened thing. Pedigree doesn't matter here. It's never mattered here. It's never mattered where you go to college. When I had my staff at LA Magazine, I couldn't even tell you where they went to college. I didn't care. So like, that's just something that's so not important here. So I think a lot of things that are not important to us here are really important there. And there is this feeling, right, that like this is something that should matter and we don't care.
Stacey, why do you, or either one of you, why do you think that this misunderstanding or focus on these really cliche stuff like the matcha, the crystals, whatever, is it's so focused on LA, the New York Times, or we are throwing the New York Times under the bus, but the New Yorker does this too. I know the Washington Post did something on San Francisco that really upset a lot of people. Why is it so focused on LA, California certainly, but LA specifically, as opposed to Miami or Chicago or any other city?
Anywhere at this point. I mean, I think anywhere. I think what we're seeing is the amount of people all over the country, in cities or in rural, anywhere, wanting to be as, I guess, flaky would be the word, as what they perceive Californians to be. They want goop stuff. They want the candles. They want to have the gluten allergy. They don't realize that. I think what it is like, Mary and I, we grew up in Los Angeles. I'm sure we've each known a million people who've done a million strange fad things. And the rest of the world is just waking up to that now. But for some reason, New York, or maybe these East Coast publications still they're so out of touch that they just still think, oh, that's LA. It's everywhere. Bad ideas, fads, snake oil, it's everywhere.
When did it start? Was it, I hear Annie Hall. In fact, I was having a conversation with a SoCal friend this morning, and he was referencing Annie, the only cultural significant thing about LA is the ability to make right-hand turns at red lights.
Yeah.
But when did this,
still.
when did this start? Can we blame Woody Allen?
I think it would predate that, right? See, like, I feel like it probably started with a lot of New York writers who came to LA to
make movies
and had terrible experiences. Bad taste in their mouth. And that happened to a lot of amazing writers, right? A lot of like renowned writers. So I feel like some of that infused a lot of early, probably filmmaking and scripts. And to be perfectly honest, like the LA Times for decades under the earlier Chandler regimes was the paper of boosterism and just like a lot of embarrassing, journalism that was in the LA Times when it would cover itself, until it made the shift to become a quote world-class paper in the 70s under Otis Chandler. So there was a lot of things like that, I think, that you could, pick on. And in LA, like spirituality has always been, right? I mean, that's just a fundamental base of the building of LA. But again, it's about the fact that like people could come here and be whatever they wanted to be. It wouldn't be judged for that, and could start movements, whether they are spiritual or artistic,
without having gone to Duke in 1957 or,
Yeah.
Well, without that pedigree that you mentioned, that very East Coast thing of keeping track of all of your connections.
And the YLA thing, like the only thing I would add to that, I think Stacey, you're spot on with it, is that I do think, and Beth, you and I can get into it a little bit with San Francisco versus LA, but I do think LA has become a city that people are obsessed with everywhere. Like there is a tremendous amount of journalism written about LA. And when I travel, no matter where I am in the world, and I say I'm from Los Angeles, people like, they know it, they have an idea, they can see it, right? They're really interested in it. So of all the,
believe it. Yeah.
like, it's that one.
Why? I mean, I guess LA is it, do you think it's the Hollywood thing? Movie stars, Kardashians,
Yeah.
crazy crimes for me is what excites me about LA. But really, I mean, it is the Hollywood thing. I do want to get into, you guys were flying through this, but so this cultural phenomenon, let's call it, of New York media totally getting LA wrong repeatedly and LA people getting really pissed off about it, has become such a conundrum that in 2019 Curbed made a bingo card. When an East Coast publication comes out with yet another one of these, hot takes on LA, what to look for, or like you can check things off your bingo card list. And included on this bingo card list is casual racism, a Joan Didion quote, mentioning traffic, a quote from a person who moved to LA less than a year ago. That's a thing that comes up a lot.
Yeah.
Is that these are written by genuine.
It's a quote from the person's other friend who moved out there with them to, probably.
Should people have, I mean, I guess that's a journalism question, but to write about a place, to provide a sense of place, especially when you're doing it, a cultural take. I'm not talking about writing about breaking news or whatever that's coming out of LA. Does it need to be written by people like you who were born in LA, who have roots and, deep understanding of, are a part of the community and culture? Is that just a requirement?
No, I don't think so. I think you can just write about your experience. I mean, I moved here to the desert and immediately wrote a scathing piece about all the culture out here. I didn't waste any time.
How was that received?
They loved it, honestly.
Oh, really?
It's been a big hit. Absolutely. It's been a big hit. So yeah, I think you just have to just be an observer, and it doesn't really matter where you're from,
Yeah, no, I don't think so either. To me, it's more indicative, Beth, of this like laziness, and and that really bothers me. Like I can't stand, no matter who the source is, right? I cannot stand lazy journalism, and I also can't stand latching onto a narrative, whatever that narrative is, that's not based somehow in like data or research or real reporting. And so I think, like often is the case with a lot of these stories, New York Times and elsewhere, parachute in, talk to a couple of people who they asked a friend ahead of time, who should I talk to? Someone says, Stacey said, someone who's a recent transplant. And you just look at the red wave that all media companies like latched onto about the fall elections and how ill-informed that was. Like they latch onto some kind of a narrative, and it's really hard to break out of that. So once you're in that lane as a media company, I just think there's a lot of just laziness. So I'm all for people coming here and trying to understand the city and learning from the people who know the city, what the city's about. But you can't even, that's what I was saying before, it's hard work to have such a narrow view of the city if you're here for more than a couple of days, unless you literally never leave a extremely tiny bubble. Right. And that's the same in San Francisco. It's the same in Chicago. Like you would really have to be at basically Goop headquarters for 48 hours to walk away with some of these stories that you read about in the style section.
I will just clarify what Goop is, just in case there's anyone here that is not following Gwyneth Paltrow's lifestyle brand. It is called Goop, and it very much aligns with the stereotypical LA vibe, one might imagine.
Yes, exactly.
Just in case someone didn't know what Goop was. We've mentioned it twice now. I didn't want to leave anyone out. Yeah. Does anyone do it well, or has the New Yorker, is anyone really nailing it? Are there East Coast writers that get it? And are there, does LA cover the East Coast? And does LA do a good job? Do LA writers do a good job of
Probably not.
opposite ends.
Yeah.
It's hard to say because I think so much of it is just like, sitcoms based in New York. So that's kind of based nowhere, it's, yeah, I wouldn't have enough examples of that.
I have to think like there's certainly some fantastic, I think, but again, like they're people who are based here who write well. I think Dana Goodyear does a really great job writing about LA, who's a writer for the New Yorker. Susan Orlean, who lives here now, is a beautiful writer and is does a great job. So I'm trying to think of writers based in New York, right, who write regularly about LA. There was something I took a screen grab of that in one of these articles that I posted in her Slack channel, and I took a screen grab of how the New York Times was selling it under their For Our California Readers. It was one of their stories about California, and the way that here's how they phrased it on it. They said, "Love letters to California. The state might be drought-stricken, fire-ridden, and wildly expensive, but our readers love it all the same." To answer to your second part of your question, Beth, like I cannot fathom the LA Times writing an article about New York that used that same language. And the LA Times, in fact, trying to think of, we'll get it in the email we share. They did a very funny parody of one of these horrible stories that the New York Times did, where they replaced all of it with yeah, and it was hilarious because when you do that, that's a really fun parlor game exercise. Is just take one of these stories and replace New York in with every mention of Los Angeles, and you just think, who wrote this? Like, what decade is this?
Yeah, it's offensive.
I think I have that one right here. Is that it? Is that, I don't know if that's right. There are a lot of these op-eds. This is by Anne Friedman. New York is a livable place. Who knew?
Okay, that's a great one. Anne's a brilliant writer, and that one's hilarious. That's not the one I'm thinking of, but I think it was maybe Lucas Kwan Peterson. That's the name who's a food writer for the LA Times. He wrote a hilarious parody of one of their worst stories ever. But Anne's story, I'm really glad you pulled that one up. That one's really great.
Can you talk about why? I mean, I understand why you care, that they're getting it wrong. This is a place where you are from. But Mary, you touched upon this at the beginning of our conversation, that there could be some really serious ramifications that eventually will trickle down into the community and people's lives by these misrepresentations of LA from a paper like the New York Times, like a serious location where people go for information. Getting it wrong screws us up.
Yeah. I mean, Stacey, I love because I talk about this a lot. Like, I love your take on this. Like, mine is just like, it makes all of us have to work harder for the things that we do. Like, right. Even if that's just like on a very personal level. It's a story I never shared before, but being in New York as an editor at Los Angeles Magazine and plenty of wonderful New York editors who I've met and dealt with through the years, but being at the National Magazine Awards and literally having male New York, and that could be just as much about being a woman as it is anything else, like finding out that I'm from Los Angeles or that I'm going to be running a division and saying, you're going to be that guy's boss. And I had an editor of a major New York publication go, you're going to be that guy's boss. And it was a new job I had. And I was like, oh, well, yeah, weird way to say it, but yeah. And he literally laughed in my face. And so I can't help but think maybe not just the woman or being a blonde or whatever. It's just like California girl is going to be doing that. Mm-hmm. And that's like, I know that guy's from New York who did that. I know, and he doesn't run that publication anymore, but he runs other publications. And I know that he's been probably reading the New York Times for the time he could read. And that's constantly been what he's been told. Like, that's what California and Los Angeles is, a bunch of vapid people, right, who drink matcha and
hop on trends and are vapid and shallow.
And drive everywhere.
Drive everywhere.
They don't walk. They don't know how to walk. They actually don't know how to walk. It's sad.
It's quite possible I found out the hard way that to live in Los Angeles without a car for some time.
Oh.
It's very possible.
Another one.
Yeah, it's entirely possible.
Yeah. Oh, I used to take the bus to the Los Angeles Magazine, and people New York
can't believe it. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What do you want, Stacey? We'll start with you. I think this is a question for both of you, but Stacey, we'll start with you. What do you want, or what's your guide for the inevitable transplant East Coast writer that gets dropped here to write 800 words about, you know, Echo Park or wherever. I'm from, again, the Bay Area, so I won't know these places, but I know it's always these like cool little Los Feliz neighborhoods. What do you want them to know? What's important for them to get before they start their blank page and get to work?
Let me think. Well, okay, we understand it. This is an odd place to you. It might feel like another planet, but we have been doing this for a long time. It is a nice lifestyle. I've never sought another lifestyle, and just be open to it. And you don't necessarily need to label it an LA lifestyle, because you must remember that a lot of people in Los Angeles making what you believe to be the LA lifestyle are not from LA. This is a thing that people from LA I think talk about for a long time. It's generally the people doing the things that a New York a transplant writer might find irritating in Los Angeles are people who are not from Los Angeles.
The matcha, the crystals, the standing in line for a biscuit, whatever.
I think that happens everywhere.
I've stood in line for biscuits in Portland many times.
Yeah.
Mary?
We should just stop making about places.
Yeah, I think it gets back to that that notion of just painting things with a big brush, and don't do that anywhere. Like, don't go as a journalist, don't come out saying this is the way it is there. Even a place like the West Side, which I do not live on. I'm a dyed-in-the-wool northeaster in Los Angeles. But like I live here, and like I don't paint the West, and I don't go to the West Side that much, but like I don't paint it with one brush, because you can't. The West Side is it actually has a very diverse population, but you would never know that from the way in which, if they say certain things in the New York Times in particular, they just tend to think like this is the entire way. We see a lot of people at the farmers market during the day. Wow, no one works in LA.
No one works.
Wow. I mean, they write lines like really like in a city where even the valets or even where all the valets. You remember that one? Oh my God. Seriously? You are seriously going to write that sentence where all the valets are even screenwriters? Have you ever interviewed a valet? So, like, that's what it is. Like, yeah. So I think the first thing I want them to do is actually interview people.
Yeah.
Right.
Do you think that they really just made the assumption that all of the valets are screenwriters? And of course they're valets because everyone has cars, because it's such a
weird.
And
it's weird.
Well, and so I think that the point that you're trying to make, and let me just tie this up in a bow, because then I want to get on San Francisco, which has come up, of course, in the comments, is that New York, for being basically like 200 years older than LA, regards itself as this richly textured, historic, international base of all knowledge and culture and art and wisdom, and is looking at LA like a cutout doll that you attach clothes to and put a little cactus in her hand, and she's, plant mom. Plant mom is another thing that I think about.
Is she friends with Wine Ant? I've heard of
Yeah, right. But there is Los Angeles being so gigantic and having such a rich history. And I have to admit, as a Northern Californian, working at Alta for the past 5 years, my eyes have been so greatly opened to the complexity of LA history and the richness of it and the fascinating things that have evolved from LA that have nothing to do with the movie industry. Mary being a big part of my education on that. But so as we run out of time, I do want to touch on, because this has come up in Alta Lives before, mainly between Mary and myself, but that I mentioned this to Stacey and she wanted to chime in right away. One of the comments that I read on that bingo sheet that Curbed LA did years ago, someone was like, forget New York. Let's talk about why San Franciscans are so obsessed with comparing themselves to LA and how LA totally doesn't care about San Francisco. Is that true? We really like to compare ourselves as a native San Franciscan. I live in the suburbs of the Bay Area now, but we do think that we have I mean, I'm sorry to tell you this, Mary, but that Northern California is beautiful and rugged and the center of innovation and progress. Do you disagree?
Stacey, you want to go
Me?
first?
Uh, I agree. And I would have to say the only reason I don't live in San Francisco is just because it's too cold.
Knowing where you are.
I think I know.
You guys lost all credibility with the snow this
So
morning.
now I'm definitely not moving to San Francisco. I know I can't take it.
Yeah, I've said, that's since the first time I visited with you all up there, and like I've always loved San Francisco. I didn't know anyone who didn't like San Francisco. Like it was like it's a wonderful place to visit, and I absolutely love to visit it. I've always thought, or in pondering this as a history major and having read a lot about California history, like San Francisco was supposed to be the biggest, brightest city. It had the big port. It was the city that developed first, right? It was supposed to really outrank little upstart Los Angeles, which ended up getting to be huge, and mostly greatly due to the aerospace industry and the car design and tech, and the film industry like became the area of interest. So I don't see it going the other direction other than the Los Angeles Dodgers San Francisco Giants rivalry. And in that case, like, yes, that is a legit, like, people don't like each other. But yeah, I don't. So I found it very hilarious and odd that all of you had that perception in Northern California, because we don't.
That's kind of been across the board, I found, with Angelenos. It's like, oh, that's cute that you think that. I will say that the Bay Area has felt, perhaps not as strongly, the sting of East Coast media getting San Francisco and the Bay Area wrong, especially Blaze, our editorial director, popped a New York Times article about San Francisco and the empty downtown, just totally getting the current vibe of San Francisco all wrong, right? I mean, San Francisco is currently used on certain 24-hour news stations as an example of dystopian America. Like, we're basically like fallen into the abyss, which is not necessarily.
I just think, I mean, no offense, but I just don't think New York is as threatened by San Francisco as it is by Los Angeles.
Why are they threatened? But what are they threatened? What is the threat from LA?
The younger, newer, it's like, I'll just take it back to my family, sadly. It's the younger, it's the golden child. They're always going to be a little,
You're cooler.
Yeah. Younger, cooler, less concerned with protocol.
Yeah. And a city that's perceived as being more important than theirs by a world stage. And I really think I really think that that's it. And I think we are, but
we have an interesting comparison between San Francisco and LA from Michael Lehrer that I'd like to read to you. San Francisco is great and beautiful and deeply smug about those qualities. LA is a bastion of non-judgment, openness, and nonchalance, and easy about its beauty and ugliness.
That's
and lots of people agreeing with him.
Very zen. Yeah,
that's perfect. Yes.
Well, on that note, we will do a whole other, we're going to do a NorCal, SoCal showdown one day. I think that we should like rally our teams and just kind of get into it on a different Alta Live. But this has been a fascinating discussion today. And again, we just want to reiterate, we love journalists from all over the world, of course. We just want them to take a deeper dive into LA and California when writing about our culture and our communities. Stacey Grenrock Woods, Mary Melton, you guys are awesome and funny. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me today for this conversation.
This was a blast. Thank you so much. Been great.
Folks, Alta Live is on ski week. We're on hiatus next week as I head to the AWP conference in Seattle. We will be back 2 weeks from today with LA Times writer Gustavo Arellano talking about, he wrote this fabulous newsletter. We'll include it in your email that you'll get later this afternoon on these calendarias that there's incredible art. You've seen them in your favorite local taquerias and bodegas. And we're going to talk about the calendars, you will recognize them and flip through those.
I know the calendar. Yeah.
You know exactly what I'm talking
I know
about, the
the ones,
Aztec
yeah.
warrior kind of calendars.
Mhm.
We'll be speaking with one of the biggest producers of those out of Mexico, but he exports them to the United States. So get excited for that one. Folks, from the Golden State, we wish you all the best, and we will see you next time. Take care.
Thanks so much.